well, I've sent the message, so we'll see if we get a response. Um, Hello, hi everybody. Oh, it's so nice to see all of these faces in the room, and I'm very happy to have you. I'm sure that there will be a few others joining, so but to be conscious of time, we will get started. And I will begin by just saying hello again. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for being here and being in our online gathering. Aha. Um, there's Joe. And I just wanted you to, very similar to what you heard earlier, is to find a comfortable sort of position. Let yourself land into the space, breathe a little bit, especially if you've been rushing from one thing to another. And what I would like to do is to invite Daisha to offer an opening for our session today, so we can land softly into the space. Daisha, please go ahead.
Kia ora, everyone. Before I begin, I will share that our whaia Ella Henry, who is off doing funeral, support for a friend in the community, she'll be opening for a funeral there. But these are the words that have come from Ella. Rangi nui ki runga, papatua anuku ki raro, ka puta te ira tangata, i te whai au, i te ao mārama, tūturu whakamaua, kia tīna humie huie tai ki e. Now the translation for this karakia goes as, the sky above, the earth below, from which springs all humanity, emerging into the world of light and knowledge, let us come together with purpose, united and ready to progress together. Kia ora.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm feeling very grateful to have you here to do that on behalf of Ella, who is not going to be missed because her voice will still be here. And I will explain that when I get to the Elder Circle. So again, welcome to our webinar. So Embracing Indigenous Paradigm, Research as an Interface Journey. And so my name is Nida Kulshaw, and I'm excited to be part of number one, this webinar, but also most importantly, the MSR Research Committee. This is supported by their amazing work and energy. So I want to thank all of the committee members for that. This is also part of the MSR Research webinar series, which I will be speaking a little bit about at the very end to tell you what's coming up afterwards. So my hope really is to connect the work of research with the idea of who we are, our being, and connecting that with our doing. And really, who are we doing this research for? And what are we hoping this research becomes? So to get us started, I'm going to be having a conversation a little bit in a couple of seconds with Ramya, but I want to just share a little bit of how I got to this space and what this interface means to me. So I have a few notes because I want to make sure that I'm able to say this concisely and also make sense. Basically in 2021, I had taken part of an online webinar that was called Indigenous Ceremony and Ways of Knowing for Transformative Research. That was facilitated by a dear friend and early mentor, Julia Strawberg-Walker. And that inspired me, that session inspired me to think about a different path for my research and thinking about what that could look like. So the title of this webinar has a word Indigenous in it, and I wanted to explain that very briefly. That basically is coming from the work of Shanae Washington, and she describes it as a way of doing research that centers relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, and respect for Indigenous ways of knowing. But what I did appreciate, and the reason why I gravitated towards it, is that in her paper, she also quotes Cree scholar Sean Wilson, who conceptualized the Indigenous paradigm as a source for which Indigenous knowledge is created, but he also argued that a person does not need to be Indigenous to use an Indigenous paradigm. And if you follow its tenets, which he then explains, it is a choice to follow this paradigm, philosophy, or worldview that makes research Indigenous, not the ethic or racial identity of the researcher. So that's what was very interesting to me. It was an opening, it was an invitation to go ahead and, embrace this practice, which means the work is shaped not only by what is studied, but how we approach the work, the care for protocol, community, the responsibility that comes with receiving, interpreting, and sharing knowledge. So in this session, we're going to be exploring what it means to do research at an interface. When I use that term interface, it isn't really a place of compromise. It's really a place where we negotiate and where Indigenous worldviews still must, in my view, remain central. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. And we won't have maybe complete answers, but we will definitely be sharing perspectives, point of view. And one just quick note, during the session, there will be references of resources or communities that you may want to plug into. So just to say that at the very end of the session, there's going to be a reference list or a resource list that will be added to the chat. So don't worry about trying to track all of that during the session. And so just to say that's what we're going to be doing. Now I would love to bring everyone else into the room, and I would like to ask you to add one word in the chat so that all of us can sort of, enter into the space. And this is the question. In one word, what are you hoping to receive or contribute? And it could be also an observation, but it is one word. Yeah, please go ahead and add it. And take a moment just to look at the waterfall of words. Very nice. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And now I'm going to start with Ramya and invite her into the space. We're going to have a little bit of an exchange, starting off with your slides. And I'm very curious as to how you entered into this space. What is the journey that, how did you get here? And a little bit about that first, and then we're going to go into a few questions that you and I are going to explore together to offer a little bit of a framing for the rest of the session. So Ramya, if you can go ahead and get your slides ready to go.
Yeah, I'm just doing that. So thank you so much, Naida. I think that was a beautiful opening that you made today for the session. And I just feel that it's been a very little while ago that we had the first in the series of this webinar where I was the anchor and you were the panelist. And it's so delightful that you are taking it on from here. This is definitely a conversation that's continuing and becoming stronger in that sense. I'd just like to share very briefly about my own life story so far. I started off my education as an engineer, a very logical thinking engineer, and I was the the topper in the class and solving all the engineering problems. And after my engineering, I went into a career in the IT industry in India. And meanwhile, I also took up, I thought management problems have to be solved logically as well. And let me get a logical perspective of these things. And I did an MBA, following which, the project in the MBA said, okay, maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe I should do a PhD. And then went on to do, rather than just being a techie and software engineer. I went on for a couple of years. I had some managerial stint in the IT industry. During my PhD, which I did at this particular time, my thesis was a multi-level quantitative modeling which used cultural dimensions using a framework of Hofstede's cultural framework, using that as a variable which ranked between 1 to 100 on 5 different dimensions. I used this in a regression equation and tried to predict international business outcomes, right? Now, a lot of people criticize me saying that, oh my God, how could you do this? How can you be so reductionist about culture? And that sort of got me thinking. And then, during my PhD coursework, I also happened to experience a conference in a very different way, where some people told us that you guys do not know how to do research. We have to teach you, and this is the universal paradigm of doing research, and everything that you know is wrong, and this is the right way of doing it, which caused some kind of discomfort within me, saying that here I am from a civilization that knows about knowledge, and there was some dissonance there, and which I was able to express using a critical lens. Subsequently, I took a step back and I started looking at the same Hofstede framework again. And I wrote a paper that looked at it from various philosophical perspectives and came to the conclusion that there's nothing bad about taking a quantitative or a positivist approach. It's just that it's a pragmatic approach, and it just takes progress towards understanding the phenomenon in the world, and it's just progress towards knowledge. But there was still that discomfort within me saying that, okay, I'm coming from a certain context. There is some knowledge here, but I'm not able to say it. I appreciate all that's out there. And that led me to the decolonial perspectives. And in the decolonial perspectives, we started looking at, say, can I do the falsification and reversal? Can I say that that which is being called as universal, I call it out and say, no, that's not universal. And then I say, I reverse it and I say, I have my own paradigm. And then I found that I really do not have my own paradigm. I do not know what is my own paradigm. I've been so highly educated in the other paradigm, in the dominant universal paradigm, that I do not know what is indigenous. And then I said, okay, maybe my purpose is possibly to nurture and create these spaces, not only in my context, but in multiple different contexts, for what could be called indigenous. So that's my journey in short, Naida. I hope that helps.
Oh, well, actually, I'm going to jump on that question of indigenous because you describe it, and I'm going to read, you describe it as generally true to context with meaningful implications for the people there. So I'm wondering, how do you recognize when your research practice is being, doing truth, or is it really trying to default to scientific default? How do you pull it back, keep it in the way you describe indigenous? What is it that helps you do that?
Very interesting question. In fact, I started looking at, before, when I started using this term indigenous, I realized that there is already this United Nations definition that most of you would already be knowing about. But this definition refers to only 6.2% of the global population. And indigenous refers to some kind of marginalized tribes or minority communities. Whereas for management knowledge, indigenous actually means, if I take the meaning as that which is truly sensitive to the context and makes meaning for the people in a particular context, in that case, management knowledge, which is now called universal management knowledge, probably came from very small parts of Europe and US, which is at most 0.7 billion part of the world population. So indigenous to me is the rest of the world except some small parts of Europe and US from where management knowledge originated. And with this revised perspective of what is indigenous, the definition that we have come up about indigenous, this is in some of the special issues that we had on indigenous Indian management, but of course it was not only Indian, and it can be expanded to various contexts, is that indigenous knowing is knowledge based on an emic view of the world, often very meaningful within the community or culture, possibly with distinct philosophical foundations, and those that provide alternatives to the Western culture and the culture of science. Now, I would like to distinguish this from what may be called as context-sensitive research. In context-sensitive research, I'm still going to use a scientific method, but make it look at local phenomena using local language, local subjects, and locally meaningful constructs. But it still uses the same paradigm, whereas we are talking about an emic view, which also involves looking at it from different or plural ontologies and epistemologies, because otherwise it is not possible to tap into the entire indigenous knowledge or wisdom that exists. And there is definitely a case for developing such context-sensitive, decolonized indigenous paradigms rather than extending or tweaking Western theories, because existing management theories have failed to create a sustainable world, and we are looking for alternatives, and we are at a loss. We are not able to find these alternatives because we don't see it. We are not able to access it. It's all around us, but I don't identify it as management knowledge. Of course, in many of the societies, it is also due to the amnesia and the loss of confidence that results from the lingering effects of colonialism. Many times it's also about the medium of education, because you have lost the language in which you were supposed to be, or your ancestors and forefathers and mothers were thinking, and you are now thinking in a foreign language, and therefore you lack the vocabulary of the indigenous in what we have to say. And also, I think much of the Eurocentric qualitative research methodology traditions are very heavily text-based. So you provide text as input. You may do focus group interviews, you do surveys, you do all kinds of things in qualitative research, but you gather text and then you process it through text processing engines, and then you come out with frameworks or output which are also text-based, or at most 2x2s or 2x3s. So these do not enable accessing the tacit knowledge. So this is where I think we are unable to access indigenous knowledge, which can be so valuable. And there is a dire need to adopt alternative plural ontologies and epistemologies or philosophies of science to be able to access the indigenous knowledge. And where might it exist? I don't see it around me, but we might find it, if at all, in forms that are beyond text. It may exist in architecture, in artistic traditions, in lesser spoken languages and dialects, in folk literature, marginalized communities, women, children, within the myths and legends, and more broadly, even in the living arts and traditions. But in order to access such knowledge, we definitely require opening up of newer and different ways of knowing, which may depart from the Eurocentric ontologies and epistemologies that have been informing management research at large. So I think things like we should keep our eyes and ears open towards things like paintings, photographs, music, theater, sculptures, and something like this can clearly enliven and enrich the way we are approaching management research. So that's what I think about it, Naida. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you. Naida, you think you're on mute?
I am, because I didn't want to disturb you while you were presenting. So, thank you. One of the things that came to my mind, though, is how do you connect that with spirituality? So, what is it about engaging spirituality as part of an opening, as you were just talking about? Where do we find it? Is there something that you found in making that connection that enabled this opening to happen for you?
Yes, some of it was accidental, and a lot of it was also trying to reflect on that dissonance that I was feeling within myself. So while I was traveling, I stumbled upon some very beautiful sculptures in the temples in India, in the southern part of India. And there was one such sculpture which was extremely striking for the kind of knowledge that it captured in it. I'm just going to share that on a slide for all of us to see. This is a bronze statue of from the Chola era, that is a certain kingdom, and it is of the Lord of Dance, the Lord of Nataraja, or the Lord of Dance, and it represents a grand theory of the universe. In this particular sculpture itself, you can see that while he is dancing, while it is static, it is also dynamic. right? And it represents many elements about the universe. There is a drum in one hand, which represents the origin of sound in the universe. There is fire, there is earth, there is the element of the sky, which is represented by the wavy hair, and there is empty air in between. So there are the five elements of creation, and then there's also destruction, where he's actually stepping on some kind of a demon of ignorance. And then there is dissolution of the universe and the cycles of dissolution and creation of the universe. There are many, many layers of concepts which are embedded in this image, and this image is enshrined inside a temple. Now, this itself represents a grand theory of the universe, and there have been several interpretations. I do not want to go into it because that's subject matter of another discussion. But it also is supposed to represent the lot of concepts in modern physics. So if an image, a three-dimensional sculpture like this can capture so much, whereas we are trying to look for knowledge only in the journal papers, captured in text, or reporting it only through certain methods, not just reporting, capturing as well as reporting, but we're missing out on a whole lot of things. And if you found this image striking as well, I think it's just an invitation for all of us to open our eyes and ears towards what could be around us. This is just one example that I've taken here. And you can see the different elements of different elements of the theory that's there in this particular this thing there. So it's all symbolic in terms of the position of the hand, and how it is the symbols have certain interpretations and meanings, which are also what I put out in the circles there. So what I'm trying to convey is that we have many, many barriers to the creation of decolonized and indigenous management knowledge, and starting from cognitive barriers in identifying and engaging with indigenous knowledge, linguistic barriers, which I already mentioned, because maybe we are not thinking in the languages in which we in the communities that we belong to. We also have languages which are dying every day, and along with the language, there's a culture and a cosmology along with it that's also dying. There are emotional barriers. There is a deep-rooted sense of inferiority complex. Thinking, okay, maybe I have this idea, but really, is this something that I can contribute as management knowledge? Will people laugh at it, right? There are notions of what is secular and what is sacred. It's only in MSR that I have the courage to bring up religious images and not feel anxious about, no, is it okay or not okay, right? There are institutional level barriers. At the level of a single institution, you cannot publish something like this and expect an A-star publication and get your career promotions. There are institutional barriers at the level of how academia operates within a region such as India or any other country. Then there are barriers, of course, at global institutions in academia. So there are several levels of barriers that we need to engage with and move forward to be able to work with these plural ontologies and epistemologies. But of course, there is hope. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
but then there's hope. There's the organizations that actually support this work. And so to close, can you just share, you can share the slide and just in general, what did these organizations help you do in your journey?
So these are like various, when I conceptualize spaces, there are like conferences, webinars, workshops, then there have been journals and books, as well as institutions of various levels where there are such spaces, and I actively share this at every opportunity so that others are also invited to come into this space and they can make the contribution. And I will add this to your list of resources, Naida, rather than going through this, so that if anybody is interested, we can go through it. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If you want to stop your sharing the slide just so that we can make sure that we see your lovely face. And so thank you so much for doing the presentation. And it gives us a lot of thinking, at least for myself. It always brings up new things that I say, oh yeah, I need to remember that. So I do appreciate that, and also the framing. There is challenges, but there's also ways of navigating that challenge. There's ways of navigating those tensions. And so I would like to call in to conversation the elder circle, and I will explain elder. I'm using elder as an honorific to two wonderful people who have supported my journey, as well as many other young emerging academics. So Anna Maria Paredo and Joseph Gladstone, if I could have you pinned and brought into the bigger space, then we can have a quick conversation. I have some questions to ask you, so I appreciate that. I did mention, because it was already mentioned, Daisha did it this at the very beginning. Ella Henry was also going to be joining this circle, but I do have her words and her ideas, and so I will be jumping in and reading those and sharing those too. Just a quick question, Gaetan, if you could do the pinning of the two speakers. I'm not
It's
sure.
already pinned.
It's already pinned.
I think
Wonderful.
as soon as they're going to talk, we're going to see them up front.
Oh, that's
They'll
what
say
happens.
hi.
Okay. Well, so Anna Maria and Joseph, you're there. There you are. Hi. It's great to see you. All right. So I have three questions. I'm going to ask the question, and then I'm just going to maybe just choose one of you to respond, and then the other responds. I might also start by reading Ella's response to the question, and then having you both sort of react to it and give your thoughts about it as long as well as your own ideas. And so the first question, I like really starting with practice, and so I'm going to start here. The idea of being in right relationship. And so by that, I mean how we show respect, accountability, and care in the relationships that make research possible. So in your experience, what does being in right relationship ask of you as a researcher when you're doing collaboration? What kinds of responsibilities do you have to think about when you want to be in right relationship? So Joe, if you don't mind, would you start? And then I'm going to continue.
Okay. I mean, everything is relational. The theory that I've been developing for the past few years, transplanar wisdom, has constructs of animacy, temporality, place, and community. And the community is basically what holds it all together. And so that's pretty much foundational for right relationship. Not only is it theory of sense making, to take an indigenous view of sense making from a perspective rather than just solely retrospective view. It's a theory that also explains where our indigenous groundings are with everything we interrelate with. And so when you're looking at animacy, all things are living, and therefore, since all things are living, you treat everything as living and you have a relationship with that. And the idea of temporality is that there is no discrete idea of past, present, or future, that everything is now. And having that ability, that understanding of now, means that those who preceded us are still with us in body. It may not be in physical body, but they're essentially with us now. And therefore, we have relationships with them in the current moment, as we do have relationships with those we have yet to meet. Those are those who, we would call the 7th-generation era, those that they're with us now and they exist with us now and we communicate with them now. We just have yet to meet them in person. And then the idea of place, that everything we understand is through our geographic sense of place, how well we understand the land that we stand on, regardless of where that land is at. Every indigenous culture has its center of the universe. And because of that center of the universe, we believe that everything operates out of that center. And therefore, having the ability to have that connection to that center helps us communicate with our sense of place. But it also humbles us. We know that when we're out of our place, that we have no right or position to speak because we're not from there. We don't, and we don't have that understanding. So the idea of community then is how everything is tied together. And so when you're in the right relations with anybody, you're dealing not with just, respecting others' rights or everything else. You're respecting this entire idea of community through the idea of animacy, temporality, and place. And that forces you to kind of, take your time, be patient, and allow everybody to share that story so that you can be, to basically understand their story, their sense of place, their understanding, and who their elders and those yet to be born are. So
Thank you.
that's essentially it.
Wow. All right. And Anna Maria, for yourself, right relationship.
Well, let me just say that I'm calling from the Lekwingan and Wasanic and Sede territory where I am a guest. I'm a Peruvian mestizo from the Tayanes, roots in the north of Peru. And we all start from somewhere. And we all start and are motivated because of something. My roots, my cultural roots, what happened to my people motivate me to do the work I do. So that's very important, especially when we are talking about practice. What is our intention? What motivates you to do this research, right? So you ask us and say, what is doing research in a good way? Let me just complement it to what Joe has said. For me, there are 4 things. One thing is ceremony. When you are in ceremony, you are meeting each other as a human beings. You're meeting together as a human beings, not as an academic, as a just human beings. But also in ceremony, we invoke, people invoke, elders invoke, the ancestors invoke others, other non-humans, so other beings, and the next generations. So being in ceremony is so important. So before you start doing any research, get engaged, get in ceremony. Is what Joe was talking about, building relationships, even before you do anything. And then the second thing for me is community. You have to ask, and I ask myself, at least this is for me, I ask myself how this will benefit the community. How would we join the community in their efforts toward having a better life? So for me, that's important. Humility. You have the privilege. We have, every time we go to any community, we have the privilege to walk through a land where having so much struggles, to walk and to talk to people who have such a wisdom. And we have to differentiate what's wisdom than what is knowledge in that way. Wisdom has so much wisdom. So that's sense of humility. And the 4th thing to me is so important is reciprocity. And it's not about just getting back to the community later on. It's about every time. It's a continuous gift, a continuous relationship of respect and reciprocity. So when we talk about this, then for me it's about relational, it's ethical, and it's ontological position. And this is something you talked, Nadia, in the beginning, about how knowledge is created, with whom, and for what purpose. That makes it ontological, relational, ethical. So, yeah, and it's a long-term commitment, and I can talk about long-term commitment, maybe. So I will stop there. You say 5 minutes, so I would.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is just read Ella's response to this question. As Maori, indigenous to Aotearoa, New Zealand, I have been part of community developing Kaupapa Maori research over the last 35 years. It is a paradigm founded on Maori philosophy, ontology, knowledge systems epistemology, values axiology, and traditional practice methodology. Kaupapa Maori researchers acknowledge deep relational commitments to people and place as foundational practice and responsibility. My research is for with and by my people, who I serve through the research, who in turn must contribute in some ways to our aspiration for self-determination and emancipation, whilst also ameliorating the most negative impacts of colonialization, which has spawned intergenerational poverty, disenfranchisement, and the diminution of our languages, culture, and identities. Indigenous research and Indigenous researchers are intrinsically political and engaged in activism in the intellectual realm. And I appreciated this connection between activism and the intellectual realm. And this is resonating with what both Joe and Anna Maria have said, which is that it's not just doing research. It has a much deeper, not only impact, but it has an impact on the researcher themselves. I'm going to jump to the middle question, but I'm going to ask you to answer it very briefly so that we can make sure we have time for the third one. Building on that, for the interface. So you've just described right relationships, but when there is relational responsibilities, how does that end up when you meet the institutional expectations? So in your experience, what tensions have risen from this? And you can just maybe pick one example. And then how have you navigated to protect right relationship while still moving the work forward? And again, you can just pick maybe one example. I'm going to read Ella's response, and then I'm going to go to you, Anna Maria, all right? So Ella's response was, for Indigenous researchers, genuine allyship is extraordinarily important, particularly if the allies represent the dominant culture, be it Eurocentric or androcentric. True allyship involves acknowledging the privileges of the Eurocentric, androcentric, imperialist systems out of which many universities and research entities have evolved. And working in mutually respective and beneficial relationships with BIPOC peoples and communities to address inequities. And BIPOC is Black Indigenous people of color. So in case you hadn't heard that before. And also to develop new models for humanist and humane societies. This allyship should be born not out of guilt or egregious histories, but the recognition that Indigenous knowledges hold potential to enhance community and connection, physically, intellectually, and spiritually, and contribute to more sustainable and ethical futures. That was Ella's response to the question. Anna Maria, would you like to?
I think you raised a very, very important question, because Rania was kind of alluding to that interface, how we deal with that. So we are working with communities, we're working with different epistemologies, and then we have institutions that are colonial institutions with colonial histories, right? So if you ask me, this is every day. I face that every day as an author, as a teacher, as an editor, as organizer of spaces like this. So research in community with Indigenous community and for Indigenous community, it takes a long time. There's no this, it's a different cycles, 10-year cycles. Many people are young here, are going to start their career and they're having to think about that. And many of us trying to change those things, right? To think about other policies in place to help you out. But there are different cycles. I have been, for example, working with a community for 14 years. Didn't start with a research question, just starting the line, ceremony, 6 years. After 6 years, we decide, okay, we can do some, we call it task, things that the community needed, and we needed to work together to support some community members. So we didn't publish until 14 years, but no research question. So you go to journals and say, well, I don't have a research question. I don't have a data every day. We don't take pictures when it's ceremony. We don't record that. You're part of it. You're part of that walking. So then how do you navigate this, right? And it's a constant weaving and weaving and weaving. And that's what we need to, is why it's important to have these spaces, because then we can weave together, we can learn from each other. That's what is important there. So I will leave it there just to, I know you're time, so
Thank you.
we'll stop there.
We could do this for a long time. And Joseph, how would you share experience or general observation of this interface?
Give me a couple of seconds here to kind of mull it over. I have an answer. I guess I have an answer. We'll find out what goes on. So my work, I got into this work originally when I was working in public health a couple of decades ago. And so that's important to understand where I'm coming from and how I operate. And the work that I was doing in public health, I realized I was treating symptoms of greater economic problems. And so I, went into from public health into the management scholarship, wanting to study Indians. And since I didn't come from the business field, my bachelor's degree is actually in health and human performance. I'm an athletic trainer. If any of you are playing football and you sprain your ankle, I can get you going again. That's my bachelor's degree. From that, I had an opportunity to work in a senior administrative role in the organization I was at, and folks thought I had a master's degree and I didn't, so I went and got a master's degree. And that master's degree is actually in public health. And that degree is in health education, health promotion. And so I am classically trained in behavior modification. I know the different public health theories and how we get communities brought together and motivated to live healthy lifestyles. But as I was just saying earlier, that work I did made me realize I was treating greater economic problems. And so how do you address economic problems? You could go two routes. The economic route, which the Native Nation Institute at University of Arizona looks at, which is governance, but we still need people to actually run the programs and do the businesses and manage these things. And that's why I became a management professor. For me, then, it was a learning curve, a big learning curve, because I did not come from academia, and I definitely did not come from management academia. So I had to learn management academia. For the longest time, I was working on a philosophy of Indigenous philosophy and how this philosophy can be used to help us study management. And luckily, I was bumped into a mentor who told me that my philosophy is actually a theory. And that was the theory I just shared with you, transplanter wisdom theory. And so my original work has greatly evolved in that time, is that now I don't really so much look at the methodologies and the ontologies. What I want to offer now is a distinction that might be generative for a lot of people. So methods ask how we look, but I'm now doing theory because I want to use Indigenous theory to explain why what we look at matters. And I want to explain it to a community that I'm new to, and it's called the Academy of Management. And so while we look at a lot of methodologies and how do we do this work and work with communities, when we start telling the story, the how, the whys, the descriptions, the variables, how the processes that occur, how do we explain these, not trying to use an Indigenous view through a Western lens, but how do we actually explain this through an Indigenous theory? And so that's where I'm going at these days. And so when looking to answer your question then, what is it that I'm doing? I'm now looking at, what are the ontological conditions that make, non-rational knowledge practices theoretical? How do we make our theory valid within the academy? And so that's, where I've been going at these days. And so to kind of answer the question that you're asking me right now, I don't really look at methods anymore. I'm actually, my work has pretty much gone hardcore classic AMR theory building. How do we describe these realities in a way that the academy finds our theory as equally valid, as equally useful to explain phenomena? And that's the purpose of this conversation today. How do we use our Indigenous views? But beyond just methods, we use the Indigenous methods, but what are the theoretical findings in those lenses?
And I think one of the challenges that have been expressed or experienced is that there's this tension of needing also to explain something, as you just described, using a lens that already then changes what it is that you're trying to present and how you're trying to express. So I'm going to be conscious of time, and I just want to make sure that we have enough for the rest. And so I'm going to,
Can I just say something? I think
sure.
that, Jess, I think that, it's very important to know that we are building Indigenous theory. But the theory that we build it is start from empirical situations. We learn from communities, and then we bring it. And I think now we have a tremendous group of young people. I see Stephanie, I see Daisha, I see Paul there, that they are moving into. So we are not just using the theories out there. We are bringing new theories. And that's, if I have to write one word in the chat, I would say hope to bring. And that's what we are bringing, Ramja, with your work and others, these different epistemologies, because the other word is very rich, as you say.
Oh, so I'm going to close the elder circle by asking what I call bonus surprise question. One that you do that is short, and so please also respond in quite brief, so that way I can make sure that we can move to the next conversation space. This is the final question. What is one protocol you wish universities taught early? Not as an ethics compliance, but as a practice of respectful presence. So I'll repeat it so you can think about it. What is one protocol you wish universities taught early? Not as ethic compliance, but as a practice of respectful presence. While you're reflecting, I'm going to read Ella's response to this question. She said, I would love to see every university offer a course or minor in Indigenous knowledge systems, particularly in those countries that have been enriched at the cost of imperial and colonial oppression of Indigenous peoples. That's Ella's response. Anna Maria?
I would like to see not only a course, I would like to see Indigenous knowledge in all the courses. It's why we have created now a new book, a book on Indigenous knowledge, management knowledges. More than 120 people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous around the world, with different stories. I call them appetizers, because people, any of you can go to that book and open it and discuss these issues of funerals, food, whatever you want to discuss. So I would love to see that, but also I would love to see that we start classes with ceremony. I think ceremony is so important, and just even for a few minutes of ceremony.
And Joe?
In the same line, I mean, the natural resources have Indigenous ways of knowing, and you're starting to see Indigenous ways of knowing being introduced in those areas. Some of the social sciences, the sociology, anthropology classes are looking at it. So basically, I'd like to see IWOC brought into our academy.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to close. First, I want to have a heartfelt thank you to both of you for being here. And also for Ella, thank you very much for sharing your responses to the questions. And now I think I would love to create mini conversations happening in the space. And we're going to do breakout groups, but there is a purpose for this exchange. And so I'm going to sort of point you there. The idea in these breakout groups, and there's going to be small ones, is really just to exchange not only about maybe what you're hearing, the observation, but potentially some very specific questions about how you might approach either embracing this paradigm, or if you are already doing so, what are the things that you have been noticing for yourself? So what I'm going to do, and Gaetan, you're going to be, I think, putting these in. Thank you very much. Here are the questions for the breakouts. It's not to answer all three, but that they're just seeds to sort of generate an exchange. If you are embracing or considering an Indigenous paradigm, what would be your why, and who is it that you would be working for? And then the other one is if there's any aspirations or anticipated tensions that you might see. So if you're already wanting to work into the space, how might you navigate that? And the last one is what support would make this path more possible for you? So this is a great idea, but I would really need, and it's just having a conversation about one or two of these. What I would like to do is in the breakouts, it's going to be approximately 15 minutes. It's going to be smaller groups, so we might do 10 minutes, just depending. I will sort of send out a little bit of a note and then call you back into the big room. So Gaetan, are we semi-ready to send people into their conversation spaces?
We are fully ready, so I can do it now if you wish.
Wonderful. So please go ahead and send everyone in. Have a good conversation, everybody. No.
Did I forget?
No,
No,
I
I'm
think
good. And that's my wife. She might be
okay.
taking care of the dog.
So funny.
It's
Okay.
5:57. I will need to go back to the breaking room after. I
Could
don't
you
know what
stop?
happened. Yeah,
Well, could you stop recording just for a second, since we're all in
yes, I can.
breakout? Welcome back, everyone, into the space. Nice to see you. So as a way to sort of gather our thoughts, what I thought I would do is invite you, similar to what we did with the one word at the very beginning, is to add into the chat an observation that you made. So not specifically, this is what we talked about, but more about what questions came up, or maybe how you're feeling about this idea, or it could be just a reflection. So it's not specifically a statement of understanding, but more observation. And it could also be one word, or it could be a few words. And so I will leave that to you to do. Please go ahead and add them to the chat. So again, it could be one word or a couple of words if you'd like. How are you feeling after that example, or after the exchange? Sorry. Thank you. Thanks for the observations. We'll see them as they come through. Yeah. Let everybody kind of read through those. While those are populating the chat, I would love to bring into the peer circle Stephanie, Peter, and Daisha. So if you could join us in this wonderful peer circle. And I want to thank each of you for being here, for offering your stories, your insights, etc. It's been a pleasure being on this journey with you. And, you know, some of you were a little further ahead of me than others. And so I appreciate being in this group together. What I'm going to be doing a little bit different from the elder circle is I have specific questions that I'm going to be asking each person. And then at the end, I do have a bonus question for you as well. So please keep your responses to around 2 minutes or so to be sure that we have enough time to get through everything. So, and I know we could talk for hours. So just to say, I'm going to start with you, Stephanie. And again, thanks. Question for you. What first drew you towards the kind of questions and contexts that now shape your work? So what made you go, oh, that would be interesting? But then in that process, what did you have to unlearn or learn to be able to move forward in the way that you wanted to move forward?
Yeah, thank you so much, Naida. And this is a very hard question because I don't know it for everyone, but when you're doing research, it's hard to say which is the starting point. But if I need to mark, I would say that I was always had the discomfort about social justice in general, that it started kind of, I don't know, when I was 14, 15, you know, and I started to think more about how the world is organized and etc. And if I am trying to be completely honest, how this kind of directed me towards working with the kind of context that I work with, communities in Brazil, indigenous communities in Brazil, indigenous communities facing difficult situations, let's say, socially in that context, was when I started to reflect about the injustice in my own society and how this, and if I could to name something, I would say that the land dispossession was kind of the starting point and of most of the problems that we have now with colonialism, etc. So trying to address this sense of injustice, this kind of led me to the context that I do research and to know the people that I work with today. Yeah, I would leave it there.
And did you have to like unlearn or learn something? Oops. Did you have to learn something differently to be able to sort of engage in that work?
Yeah, definitely. So the learn process is like everything you should do in this space. I would say I was very grateful to have people in this room included there that guided me, specifically talking about the academia part of things. But when you're with communities, I would say you're often like learning and unlearning, right? Moments that you should talk, moments that you should just be quiet, and moments that you should be doing your research, or moments you should just abandon the idea that you're going to do an interview and help people to do the activism that they're doing at that moment. So there's a lot of sensitivity that you need to develop, and there's a ongoing sense of questioning what I'm doing here, why I'm here for, that I think we should never abandon. So, yeah, that's. I'm sorry, I'm a bit worried about time, so sorry to
No,
rush a bit.
thank you. And so, well, you're talking about your work as your work has developed, right? So field work, dissertation, and your current role, lots of awards for some of the papers as well as dissertation. And you have this sort of reality around that work. And then you have to kind of go back and forth between community management and organizational studies. And I'm just wondering, how are you navigating that interface between these two worlds?
Yeah, this also is a difficult question. I would say that one thing that I don't want to leave behind is that when I think about the sense of injustice, for example, that led me to do this kind of work, at the same time, I was always inspired by the power of the intellectual activity. So that's why I do what I do in academia. And that's why I'm not a full-time activist, because I always believe that there's something about producing knowledge that was important. There's something that is powerful there. I don't know how to explain it better, but I need to be transparent, because if I'm just worried about social justice, I don't think I would be a management scholar. So there is something of being in academia that I still consider as important there. And on saying that, I do think that in navigating the tensions of being in an academician or an intellectual, and at the same time doing research, engaged with people, I often feel myself vacillating between the overly abstract world of academia and the overly relational, community, contextual road of doing the research that I do. And I would say that you need somehow have the ability of talking to those two communities. And I feel myself many times kind of translating in between those two roads. And I do believe there is something important about this job. Yeah, I might be wrong. Probably, I don't know, maybe it was better to be an activist in the end, but I still believe that that is important. And this tension, I would say, it's a lot about translation and kind of filling those two realities.
Thank you. Thank you very much for responding. I'm going to jump over to Peter and ask you, Peter, a couple of questions, and then round off the discussion with Daisha. So, Peter, here are my two questions for you. The first is sort of an opening. What has shaped your research journey, but a journey that has led you towards Indigenous and Afrocentric approaches to your work? You know, how has working in community changed your understanding, or what inspired you to sort of make that shift in your journey, in your research journey?
Thank you very much, Naida. So, my turning point, I have been an academic, but mostly working from the Eurocentric field, because I have done research during my master's at the University of Copenhagen. I worked with the University of Oxford, also at the research associate, and I also did my PhD on social enterprises. But all that have been through a Western lens, where I had frameworks and I could go to communities to find out what fits in the framework and then try to fix and then write something that is kind of bringing out insights. But when I joined the Dylan Dewar Center for Indigenous Business Leadership, I was exposed to this new way of thinking, new way of looking at things, and a new way that is much more critical and for fronting the community voices. And when I reached in this space, I now thought about what I had done before, and I was like, wait a minute. So that was my turning point on what inspired me to join this Indigenous paradigm. And when I reached the Dilindua Center for Indigenous Business Leadership, I interacted with Indigenous scholars and the staff at Dilindua and my supervisor, Michelle Evans, who taught me much more. And I read Indigenous scholarship because I wasn't aware about any of those. I was new to everything. I engaged with Indigenous research methods, and then I also learned how to write an Indigenous focused research proposal with guidance from these scholars at Dilindua and the broader Dilindua community. And this led me to reflect much more because all these people at Dilindua and the Indigenous scholars I worked with and I interacted with were saying, we are doing all this for the development of our communities. I am an immigrant in Australia, although I started working with the Indigenous people, the Indigenous entrepreneurs in Australia. That was my target when I came to Dilindua. But because everyone keeps on saying, I'm working for my community, I'm working for the development of my community, and I was like, wait a minute. I have the most marginalized communities in the world who are living in proximity with my Indigenous community back home. So this turned me back to the Afrocentric approaches and thinking about going back to Africa and going with this new lens of Indigenous research and then adapting it and learning more about the Afrocentric methodologies and approaches and putting my thoughts back to my indigeneity as a Muntu, the Ubuntu principles, because I'm part and parcel of that. But, this Western-centric views and understanding had robbed me of all this. So I went back, thought about it, and re-identified myself as an Indigenous African. And I used such thoughts of Sankofa. I had to go back, pick what I had lost and bring it now to the present to help me go forward and work for the marginalized communities in Africa.
Yeah, and I resonate much with the Sankofa, as both we have had long conversations about that in exchange. And in that transition, you made, or maybe in that process, you started to make connections to different organizations that support this. I'm just going to mention a few. The Africa Indigenous Knowledge Research Network, and also they have a related youth forum. And then you also shared another organization, which I would love for you to mention. So what has it provided to you or given to you finding these communities and saying, oh, like, what happened when you made those connections?
Before going to the connections and the organizations, I would like to respond to the second part of question one, how working in the community now has changed my understanding of responsible research. One is because I work in these two Indigenous communities in Australia and then in Uganda, I have learned that research must be relational, must have relational accountability. Then second, there's reciprocity. All these things used not to be in my research paradigm before I went to the Indigenous context. And then consent, very important. It's ongoing and it's continually negotiated and it is dependent on trust. This is what I have learned. And coming to the question about the organizations, well, generally the networks are very important when you are a new scholar coming to kind of a new research paradigm. Thankfully, I'm kind of part of different organizations. One is the IARIMOS. My first very Indigenous conference was with the International Academy of Research in Indigenous Management Organizations, where I got people I became friends with, and up to now, they are my mentors, trying to mentor me to really work and write very, very good stuff. And of course, I am part of the Luminary, which is the network in Canada, but I'm among the the scholars from the African context. And what you're asking directly is on the ICRAN, which is the African Indigenous Knowledge Research Network, where I attended its first conference last year in Entebbe, Uganda. So these networks are important because they create a bridge between universities and communities. For instance, this ICRAN brings together the universities in Africa, even beyond Africa, and the indigenous community members and organizations through community-based participatory research, which helps, of course, emerging researchers like me to stay grounded in community relationships rather than being driven by academic priorities. Then second is the networks provide a collective support for early career researchers. For instance, this ICRAN focuses on building the capacity of early career researchers and postdoctoral fellows and graduate students. And third, the networks help in strengthening intergenerational accountability. Because, for instance, in ICRAN, we work with elders, traditional leaders, and the youth and other researchers. And the youth are these people who help us in bridging this intergenerational accountability. And fourth,
I'm
the
sorry
networks.
to interrupt, Peter, but we have
Yeah.
very limited time now. I would like to
Yes.
allow Daisha to respond to Naida's question.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much.
So thank you very much. And I want to make sure, Daisha, you have a chance to respond. So if you could, I'm going to ask you your two questions. And I'm going to start with your journey because I have found it incredibly powerful. And I'm curious what has shaped your approach in navigating your own research path. Now, of course, that can take like a super, super long moment to try and respond to, but please do share. Go ahead.
Okay, that I share this picture. Can everyone see the picture? Yeah. Okay. So it's not showing for me. You can see
Oh.
women on there?
It just
No?
disappeared. No, I think you
Oh,
ended
okay.
it. Go back. You clicked it, I
Okay.
think.
Oh no. Okay. Oh. All right. We'll just.
There you go.
I'll put. There we go. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be quick. Sorry. So what? How does it come to be? How did I get here? Or is that that was kind of the question?
Yeah, your journey to getting here.
In my journey, yes, yes. So it would have to start with my grandmother. So on the left side, you see my grandmother at the top. She's from the Cook Islands, a beautiful island called Aitutaki. Please go there if you're ever wanting some sunshine and bright yellow sand and peace. And she kind of raised us in a very Christian way, but also the things I learned from her was actually have the table set in case anyone arrives so you can treat them like royalty when they come in, and make sure your cupboards have more than enough food so that if anyone arrives, you can feed them and their families. So this is what I guess the practices that my grandmother has taught us. And also the woman must do this and all these amazing things. My grandmother, at the bottom left of the screen, she passed away quite early, but I did know her, and she was the kind who would also open her home, probably less things in the house, but would give you everything there was in the house, no matter who you were. And so her home was open to you no matter what. Her upbringing was a bit more connected to the chiefs in the area. And so at a time where it was kind of punishable to speak Te Reo Māori, the language, my grandmother, and hard to speak English for some, my grandmother was able to speak in both English and Māori very well, which is quite it's for us, it's education. So she's able to educate and translate between communities and I guess crown entity type things. The reason I share these with you is in research and for Indigenous research, it's a very personal journey. If we cannot take who we are into the research, we may as well just do what everyone else is doing. And so, when I came through academia, it's it's the same old thing, getting taught Western ways, but we're at home getting taught a certain way. You leave the house and you put on the mask. And it was asked, what would we like to be taught at university? Well, I wasn't actually taught Indigenous theory until the end of the degree, the end of the masters. So we had heard things like, even in the masters, we probably heard grounded theory, which for me was like, wow, I like grounded theory. And then participatory action research, wow, I like that too. And then that leads me to when I met Ella Henry, who says, grounded theory, oh, that's Kaupapa Maori, or action research, that's Kaupapa Maori, and so there's a lot of these practices that actually we are living anyway. And so we're very fortunate to have our Indigenous scholars who've gone before us to kind of put that into intellectual terms so that we have something to defend ourselves, but also to stand firm in who we are without justificatory reference to a Western model or something like that, while also comfortable to borrow. So I am saying that, whatever way works for us. We're very, if something's hard, we know how to go around. If something tries to stop us, we know how to go around and we know how to do that together. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. I have been brought through with beautiful elders, or for us, they might be tuakana, mareikura, taunga. So I've got Ella here, who's been carrying me for a long time and has warned me, hey, get ready. We're not going to be here forever. So you guys better get ready. And when she said that, I really did it. I can't imagine a world where we wouldn't have our Ellas and our Joes and our Ana Marias guiding us. And so this process is very much a part of preparing ourselves to carry this knowledge that is just so rich. But yeah, so that's does that answer the question? Sorry, I may have gone over.
No. And we're going to probably go over just by a few minutes. So I'm hoping everybody will hang on while we do, because I want to ask the second question, which is, you were really key, or at least you were involved in developing the Maonaura, I think I pronounced it right, Pacific research. And that guidelines I thought was amazing when I looked at that. Yes. And I was just thinking, what did you learn in the process of trying to do something like that for an institution? Because this was done
Yes.
within a university context.
Yes. Well, for one thing, we were lucky it was well funded, which is not usually a thing that we, experience. We usually have to do it on our own, or extras everywhere. And we still did extras. So with this one, there's something I feel is very important, is that we do report to our community far more than any funder institution. And that can get me in trouble a little bit. But it's, we've all sat in rooms where our clients, or the ones who have purchased us to grab the information, have said, oh, can you make the information look a bit different, or a bit more, sparkly, or less dangerous, or whatever it is. And it's kind of our role as Indigenous research to stand there and go, are you saying you'd like me to hush a few voices over here? It's actually bringing to light what you are truly asking when you ask for those things. And so what we wanted to do with these guidelines is, and I will say they're not perfect. They weren't given them the amount of time we dream for them to be given, but we did what we could. And it was basically based on the community. So we went and spoke to our Pacific community, and Pacific and New Zealand, just for a bit of context, that includes 18 island groups. So it's like, paint us with this color. So there's already a complexity in it, because I'm a Cook Island, and I'm in this book that will also share things about Samoa and Tonga and all these other islands. So it's kind of a navigating those different spaces and making sure that what is shared is, shared values and things like that, but also identifying the differences between. Just a bit of background in terms of output. So we went and spoke to our community. We brought that back and we wrote down what they said, in alignment to what's out there in terms of data sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty, and all that type of thing. If you can look at this design here, we had our young mid-20s Pacific students, they did this for us. And I was really commended by the look of this. And what I loved is I shared with the girls who are in their master's degrees as well as doing creative work. Look, I want this to represent how proud we are and how beautiful and warm our communities are. Go with what you think. And, in our institutional settings, it's very like, why don't you give them a bit more? They should be keeping to this and this and this. Well, we let them run free. And that's kind of also the beauty of our Indigenous ways, is that we're not trying to tie in all the beauty that comes with indigeneity. We're trying to let it free. We need it. We need more of it. And I've had a student before ask, he's from Iran. He says, I really like the Māori methodology. Could I use it? And we've heard by, for, with Māori, and there are reasons why non-Māori may not do a Māori methodology. But I did tell him that's really cool to hear that, you can write of it as inspiring you, but it might bring you back to your home and why you do things that way and why you feel those things are important. And so, yeah, there is in writing these specific research guidelines, even, the authorship of it is a shared authorship. I wrote the bulk of it, but it had a whole advisory Pacific group to review it and make sure I was taking care of and taking care of the voices. So it's a whole process, but the reciprocity part is, bringing our young in to make sure it looks beautiful. We had a celebration at the end. We had a blessing over the guidelines. We had our original, if you think of Linda Smith, decolonizing methodologies. Well, we have our Linda Smiths in the Pacific region. And so we had them come to the celebration of this book to kind of bless it and to share, I guess, the earlier beginning of Pacific research in that Indigenous setting. So yeah, that's...
Yeah. And I have to wrap it up because I know that we're already over time, but that I did want to leave that space for you to finish. And so I want to first thank all of the guest speakers who were here. Some of them had to leave already early, but I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to be part of this conversation, part of this exchange. Thank you everybody else who came and provided your energies, especially in the breakout groups, because I'm sure those exchanges were hopefully nourishing for you. And I just want to thank everybody for being here. Before we close, I just did want to mention that there are two upcoming events for MSR. One of them is going to be another webinar that's coming in April. So I just wanted to share that slide very quickly. It's on researching psychedelic experience, and so it's going to be at the end of April, so almost in a month's time, as well as the MSR Research Colloquium, and that happens in June, so please save the date. There are three themes of which at the moment we're going to be starting to do a call for proposals. I believe that will happen in April. And so be on the lookout for that if this is something that you would like to contribute to as well as participate in. So we do hope to see you at one and or both of these particular events. And so with that, I'm just going to again close and say thank you. Thank you for being here, and I wish you a good journey ahead, and that you carry this into your thoughts, and hopefully this inspires you a little bit in your research journeys. Again, thank you very much, everybody. Have a safe journey ahead.
Thank you, Naida, for organizing.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.